Velociraptor, speedy plunderer. Velociraptor means speedy plunderer, and indeed this Cretaceous period dinosaur was built to be a quick hunter. Velociraptor was lightweight, with long back legs for running, a stiff tail for balance, needle-sharp teeth, and a fairly large brain. Like its cousin Deinonychus, the middle toe of each hind foot had a large, vicious, curved claw that could be used for slashing at its prey. Some scientists think this fearsome dinosaur hunted in packs, perhaps bringing down dinosaurs much larger than themselves by grabbing them with their front claws and slashing at their bellies with their mean back claw. A human being could have been torn apart in 30 seconds by a pack of velociraptors. A very exciting dinosaur find occurred in Mongolia in 1971. It included a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked in a deadly embrace. The protoceratops had caved in the chest of the velociraptor, and the velociraptor was ripping at the belly of protoceratops. Both had died together. Thessalosaurus, slow one of a fast family. Thessalosaurus, or beautiful reptile, was one of the last and probably one of the slowest of the hypsilophodontid dinosaurs, which were generally known for their great speed. Thessalosaurus fossils found in North America show that they were bigger boned than their relatives. In fact, some scientists doubt that the dinosaur was of the hypsilophodont family and suggest it belonged to the iguanodont family. This late Cretaceous dinosaur differed from other hypsilophodonts in that it had teeth in the front of its upper jaw, 5 toes on each foot instead of 3 or 4, and upper leg bones that were as long as its lower leg bones. The hypsilophodont dinosaurs were a very successful family. They flourished for more than 100 million years and lived everywhere except Asia. Telmatosaurus, Transylvanian dinosaur. Though North America is one of the main places dinosaurs have been found, it is not the only place. In Transylvania, scientists have found one of the smallest hadrosaurs. Telmatosaurus transylvanicus weighed only about 800 to 1,000 pounds, 1/10 the weight of what other hadrosaurs weighed, and was only about 16.5 feet long. It lived during the late Cretaceous period. Gallimimus, chicken mimic. Like its American cousins Struthiomimus and Ornithomimus, Gallimimus had a somewhat ostrich-like appearance, with long legs and a toothless skull. It was larger than Struthiomimus and Ornithomimus, and could probably run at almost 35 miles an hour. It probably ate lizards and insects, as well as plants. Its hands were not built for grasping, so perhaps Gallimimus used them for digging. Building a nest. Once, scientists thought dinosaurs left their eggs to bake in the sun, but as you can see in this movie, they now hold a different view. Now they have found evidence that dinosaurs built nests and even cared for their young after they were born. Parasaurolophus, the trumpeter. Of all the dinosaurs in history, Parasaurolophus must have had one of the most distinctive-looking heads. The crest of this 33-foot-long duck-billed dinosaur measured almost 6 feet in length and was made of a strong but hollow tube filled with nasal passages. These nasal passages connected from the creature's nostrils back to the very tip of the crest. When scientists first discovered Parasaurolophus, it was thought that the crest was used as a kind of snorkel. But that could not have been farther from the truth, since the tip of the crest didn't have an opening in it. There are plenty of other theories for how Parasaurolophus might have used this oddly shaped crest. It could have been used like a trumpet, making sounds to warn others of danger or to attract mates. These dinosaurs, which traveled in herds through the jungles of North America, had very good eyesight and may have used their unique headgear as a form of identification. Oviraptor, eggs over easy. The first complete fossil of Oviraptor was discovered in Mongolia, just a few feet from a nest of fossilized Protoceratops eggs. It is very likely that the oviraptor was about to make a meal of the eggs when an angry adult Protoceratops caught it in the act and killed it. For that reason, oviraptor got its name, which means egg thief. Oviraptor was an unusual dinosaur. Measuring 5 to 6 feet long, it had a short head and a massive pair of toothless jaws shaped like a beak. With strong muscles in its mouth, oviraptor must have had a powerful bite that was useful for breaking through hard surfaces, such as the eggs of other dinosaurs. Another interesting feature was a unique crest above oviraptor's snout that was full of air passages and openings for its nose. Stygimoloch, to butt or not to butt. Stygimoloch, or demon from the river Styx, was one of the head-butting variety of dinosaurs called pachycephalosaurs, but some scientists think it may not actually have used its head to butt with. Unlike other pachycephalosaurs, its domed skull was covered with long spikes and horns that looked dangerous, so it may have been enough for Stygimoloch to display its headgear to establish its social standing. Aviemimus, the bird mimic. This small dinosaur, found in 1981, had some interesting bird-like features. But is it related to birds? Aviemimus, or bird mimic as Kurzanoff called it, had a large brain and toothless beak, plus a ridge along the back edge of its forearm that Kurzanoff thought resembled the bumps on bird skeletons to which feathers are attached. This made him think that perhaps Aviemimus had feathers on its arms. It was possible, he thought, that Aviemimus ran along and used its feathered arms to take quick jumps and to swat bugs to eat. Though it sounds conceivable, Aviemimus is not believed to be ancestral to birds because it came tens of millions of years after Archaeopteryx, a small flying dinosaur that is considered to be the first bird. Many paleontologists also doubt that Aviemimus had feathers. This is because feathers are extremely complicated, much more complex than they look. And scientists find it difficult to believe that feathers could have evolved twice. Protoceratops, frilly dinosaur. Fighting the brutally hot winds of Mongolia's deserts, an American Museum of Natural History expedition in the early 1920s made a startling find. They unearthed masses of complete skulls and skeletons of Protoceratops, the first of the horned dinosaurs, known as Protoceratopids. Living 90 million years ago, Protoceratops was the distant ancestor of the larger and more familiar Triceratops. They shared many of the same features. Measuring 6 feet long and weighing close to 400 pounds, Protoceratops had a large, heavy skull, framed by a bony neck frill, which was made lighter by 2 window-like openings in the skull. It also had a narrow parrot-like beak with powerful toothed jaws. Protoceratops had no horns, although it had a crest, or nose horn, along the top ridge of its snout. Some experts believe that this bump, only associated with the male of the species, was used in combat between enemies. By far the most famous discovery made during this trip was a whole nest of very well-preserved Protoceratops eggs, along with skeletons of hatchlings and juveniles. The eggs had been carefully laid out in a circular fashion in shallow depressions made in the sand of an earlier desert at this same site. But the swirling sands had probably covered the nest so deeply that the babies never had a chance to hatch. Tarbosaurus, little Tyrannosaurus. Ah, what beautiful teeth! 13 Tarbosaurus skeletons have been found in Mongolia. This alarming reptile, as its name means, was first discovered in 1955 in the Nemegt Basin in that country. The bones are so much like those of Tyrannosaurus that many experts think it was essentially the same animal. However, the Tarbosaurus skeletons are somewhat smaller than those of Tyrannosaurus, and there are some small differences in the skull. Gripposaurus, the hook-nosed dinosaur. Gripposaurus, meaning griffin lizard, was a large hook-nosed plant-eating dinosaur with an arch of bone on its snout. It lived in the late Cretaceous period and had the typical duck bill of hadrosaurids. Gripposaurus was named by dinosaurologist Lawrence Lamb. Chirostenotes, slender hand. What little we know of Chirostenotes, which means slender hand, is from two sharply clawed hands, the only two parts of this dinosaur that have been found. However, these hands resemble the hands of the dromaeosaurs, some of the fastest and meanest of the meat-eating dinosaurs. If this is true, it is quite possible that Chirostenotes hunted in packs and was capable of tracking and killing much larger dinosaurs. Nanotyrannus, a young Tyrannosaurus. At about 16 feet long, Nanotyrannus was a relatively small meat-eating dinosaur. Its name means tiny tyrant, and it is known only by a skull found in Montana and a few teeth from South Dakota. For a while, scientists thought it might be an Albertosaurus, except that its eyes faced forward, while Albertosaurus's eyes faced outward. These forward-facing eyes meant it must have been good at judging distances, so it may have been a good hunter. While it appears not to have been an Albertosaurus, some scientists think it may have been a young Tyrannosaurus because some of the bones were not fused together, as would be the case if it was fully grown. Styracosaurus, spiked reptile. If you were a meat-eating dinosaur and had to stare a herd of Styracosaurus in the face, you might look elsewhere for your supper. Like other plant-eating ceratopians, the 18-foot-long Styracosaurus had a massive armor-plated head with heavy-duty spikes that would make any predator beware. While the better-known and larger Triceratops had a nose horn and two large eyebrow horns, Styracosaurus had a large nose horn and large, sharp spikes around the upper edge of the armored frill that covered its neck. Ceratopian fossils have been found in large bone beds in Montana and Alberta in North America. In these beds, all the skeletons are of the same variety and at different ages of life. This suggests they were members of a herd and were drowned during a flood. If they were herd animals, perhaps they formed circles with their heads facing outward to ward off predators. Can you imagine a hungry meat-eater circling a herd only to see sharp spikes and armor plate facing him at every point? Slow and dumb, fast and smarter. Most people would agree with pioneer dinosaur hunter Othniel Marsh when he said that the size of Apatosaurus's brain showed it was a stupid, slow-moving reptile. It's probably true that Apatosaurus was a fairly dumb animal, especially when compared to birds and mammals of today. With a brain the size of a cat's, it certainly couldn't beat you at a game of checkers. But Apatosaurus didn't need a lot of brain power to chew on plants. The 3-ton Stegosaurus didn't need much intelligence either. Its brain was about the size of a walnut, but it worked well enough to keep stegosaurs alive for more than 10 million years. However, not all dinosaurs had brains quite so tiny. Scientists have found that dinosaurs that needed larger brains had them, though they were still small compared with those of mammals. When the size of dinosaur brains have been compared to their body weight, it turns out that the big sauropods, like Apatosaurus, had small brains, only about 100,000th the weight of their bodies. Others, dinosaurs that lived in herds or hunted in packs, had larger brains, and clever solitary hunters had the largest brains of all. Fast-footed Troodon, a late Cretaceous dinosaur, may have been the smartest dinosaur of all. Its brain was about 1/1000th the weight of its body. By comparison, your brain is about 1/40th the weight of your body. Homalocephali, the flat-headed dinosaur. Although it was apparently a head-butting dinosaur, Homalocephali didn't have a dome on top of its head, as was typical of his cousins Prenocephaly, Pachycephalosaurus, and Stegosaurus. Instead, Homalocephali, its name means even head, had a thick, flat, wedge-shaped head covered with knobs. Perhaps it used its head like mountain goats, butting rival males to establish who was in charge. It walked on 2 legs spread widely apart. Perhaps this helped absorb the shock of smashing heads, or perhaps it indicates that Homalocephali gave birth to live young. Stegosaurus, the crash helmet dinosaur. Stegosaurus was certainly not a dinosaur with which to butt heads. This dinosaur was built almost entirely for ramming its uniquely shaped head into other dinosaurs. Stegosaurus belonged to a family of dinosaurs known as thick-headed reptiles, or pachycephalosaurs, because of their dome-shaped bony heads. Discovered in North America in the early part of this century, these plant-eating dinosaurs had high foreheads and massively dense skulls that were made up entirely of thickened bone. Scientists believe that Stegosaurus used its giant crash helmet to butt the heads of other males of its group, a lot like the behavior of modern mountain goats. Living in the late Cretaceous period, Stegosaurus roamed the plains of North America, traveling in herds. Adults grew to about 6 feet in length and weighed close to 120 pounds. Struthiomimus, ostrich sloth. Struthiomimus means ostrich mimic, and it is interesting just how similar to an ostrich it appears to be. Just like an ostrich, Struthiomimus stood on 2 legs, had a long flexible neck, a small head, and judging from the appearance of its skull, it also had a beak. However, it had a few notable differences. It had a long tail for balance, and arms instead of an ostrich's stubby wings. And its arms were shaped like those of a sloth, which hangs upside down in trees all day. The shape of the arms has led some scientists to think that Struthiomimus ate mostly plants, and used its long arms to pull the branches of trees down to its mouth. Others think Struthiomimus may have eaten insects as well, or possibly that it lived along the ocean shore, eating shrimp and crabs. Struthiomimus was a member of the family Ornithomimidae, which includes Gallimimus and Ornithomimus. Edmontosaurus, 1,001 teeth. Edmontosaurus was one of the largest of the duck-billed hadrosaurs, which foraged for plants in the ancient forests of what is now western North America. This 43-foot-long dinosaur had a broad, flat snout with a horny covering and a large toothless beak that looked very much like a duck's bill. While its bill was quite toothless, Edmontosaurus's inner jaw contained many banks of teeth. These teeth were perfect for grinding up plants and tough vegetation. As soon as they wore down, new teeth would grow quickly in their place. Edmontosaurus probably had more than 1,000 teeth in its mouth at any given time. Edmontosaurus's jaw was similar to that of Iguanodon. Both dinosaurs could move their jaws from side to side, making it much easier to grind and pulverize the fibrous plants that made up their diets. One of the stranger features of Edmontosaurus was its huge nostrils. Paleontologists believe these nostrils could have been covered with large flaps of loose skin. This skin could have been inflatable, allowing Edmontosaurus to make loud bellowing noises. These inflatable nostrils could also have been brightly colored and used during mating season, or as a way for individual Edmontosauruses to recognize each other. Ankylosaurs, dinosaur tanks. The ankylosaurs were the armored tanks of the dinosaur age. Even more than their cousins, the nodosaurs, they were extremely well protected. They had heavy bone plates and spikes on their backs, and their heads were covered with thick bony plates. Most ankylosaurs even had armor plating on their eyelids. With all of this armor, ankylosaurs were quite heavy. Some, like the Ankylosaurus, probably weighed as much as 4 to 5 tons. At the end of their tails was a fearsome knot of bone they could swing like a club at a predator. These dinosaurs lived in North America, East Asia, and have been found in Antarctica. Mosasaurus. What's that in the mine? The first Mosasaurus was found in a mine in Maastricht, Netherlands. At first, nobody was sure what it was. It looked like a whale to some, or like some kind of a breathing fish to others. Eventually, the fossil made its way to Paris, France, where anatomist Georges Cuvier identified it as a giant marine reptile. Mosasaurus, meaning Meuse reptile after the Meuse River, which flows by Maastricht, was a common creature of the late Cretaceous period. Commonly, mosasaurs measured up to about 30 feet, though there may have been some as long as 45 feet. Their teeth were constantly replaced as they lost them, and they had a jointed lower jaw that enabled them to open their mouth very wide to eat large fish. We know it ate fish because petrified fish skeletons have been found in mosasaur stomachs. Though the first mosasaur was found in the Netherlands, most of the best fossils come from chalk beds in western Kansas. Pteranodon, the flying reptile. Pteranodon belongs to an ancient group of flying reptiles called pterosaurs that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs. When the first pterosaur fossils were discovered in Germany in 1784, scientists thought they were aquatic animals. It took them 100 years to finally recognize they were flying reptiles. Pteranodon had one of the largest wingspans of all the pterosaurs, measuring as much as 23 feet wide. This 37-pound creature had a sharp beak with no teeth, and almost half the length of its head was taken up by a bony, protruding crest, whose purpose is still not fully understood. Some scientists think it may have been decorative and useful for attracting mates, while others believe that it may have acted like a rudder to steady Pteranodon during flight. Pteranodon probably flew over the seas of what are now Kansas and Texas at speeds of up to 23 miles per hour, feeding on fish and mollusks. Because it had no teeth, it probably caught fish like modern pelicans do, swallowing them whole. Ornithomimus, the ostrich dinosaur. This dinosaur looks something like an ostrich. It has long, powerful legs that look like they were built for running, no teeth, and may even have had a beak. Of course, Ornithomimus, which means bird mimic, isn't really related to the ostrich. Unlike the ostrich, it had a long tail that made up about half of its 13-foot length, and instead of wings, it had arms and hands. Scientists think Ornithomimus may have eaten small plants and animals. Troodontids, bird-like dinosaurs. Troodontids, or Saurornithoidids, were a family of smart, somewhat bird-like dinosaurs, with the large brains and front-facing eyes of hunting animals. They also had a sharp killer claw on each back foot, like the famous claws of Deinonychus, though smaller. Some scientists think these dinosaurs, which lived during the late Cretaceous period, could have been as smart as some mammals. Were dinosaurs social animals? Once scientists thought dinosaurs were very dumb and slow, dragging their tails on the ground. They thought they laid their eggs and left them to bake in the sun. But this primitive view of dinosaurs has given way to a more complex understanding of these amazing creatures. Now scientists believe some dinosaurs had social structures, that some mother dinosaurs cared for their young, and that they were even smarter than previously thought. Scientists have found that maiasaurs arranged their nests near each other and took care of their babies instead of abandoning them. Nests have been found with so many Protoceratops eggs that it appears it was a community nest. Dinosaurs have been found in mass graves covered by volcanic ash or river mud. This suggests they traveled together in herds. The duck-billed lambeosaurs had head crests that could have been used to toot a warning to other lambeosaurs, or attract a mate, or call the children home to their nest. Though most meat-eaters tended to hunt alone, as do many meat-eaters today, apparently some of them, such as the fierce Deinonychus, may have hunted in packs like dogs or wolves. Troodon, brainy dinosaur. Troodon was probably the smartest of the dinosaurs, with a relatively large brain for its body size. Its name means wounding tooth, and that is what it was originally known from, a single tooth. Later, more complete skeletons were found, and it was discovered that Troodon had different types of teeth in different parts of its jaw, much as humans do. Troodon was a lightly built dinosaur, with a head sort of like a bird, and eyes that faced forward like those of other hunters. It had hands good for grasping, including a thumb that works in the opposite direction to the rest of its claws, much as people's thumbs work. Ankylosaurus, the armored tank. Ankylosaurus was the armored tank of the dinosaurs. Massively built, this creature weighed close to 4 tons and measured 33 feet long, making it the largest of the group of armored dinosaurs known as ankylosaurs. Few predators could pierce its tough defenses. Ankylosaurus was covered from the top of its solid skull to the tip of its powerful tail, with bands of bony armor plating and tall, hard spines. Even its eyelids were armored. Ankylosaurus had a broad body, measuring 16 feet across. Its skull alone was up to 2.5 feet long, with sturdy triangular horns at the corners of its head. One of the most interesting characteristics of Ankylosaurus was the heavy, bony club at the end of its tail. Made of fused bone embedded in leathery hide, this acted as a lethal weapon against most ferocious predators. Ankylosaurus was among the last dinosaurs to survive the Cretaceous period and lived primarily in North America. They were plant eaters and may have lived together in small groups. Chasmosaurus. Strong jaws? Chasmosaurus, like its cousin Triceratops, had 3 horns on its head and a large shield covering its neck. But instead of being solid bone, this shield had 2 very large holes in it. This has led many scientists to think that the large gaps in the neck shield may have held powerful jaw muscles to help Chasmosaurus bite down on very tough plants. Scientists have found impressions of Chasmosaurus's skin, so they know it was covered with large round bumps. Pachycephalosaurus, biggest bonehead. Pachycephalosaurus lived in the late Cretaceous period and was the largest and last of the bone-headed dinosaurs. Its head measured 2 feet long and had a tall dome on the top of its head that measured up to 10 inches thick. Also, along the edges of its skull and on its snout were bumps of bone. Pachycephalosaurus, meaning thick-headed lizard, probably crashed head-to-head against others of its own kind in contests to establish social standing. Albertosaurus, Tyranno's smaller brother. At 29 feet long, Albertosaurus was only about half the size of its closest cousin, Tyrannosaurus. Despite the difference in size, Albertosaurus was built in much the same way as its other meat-eating relatives. It had a large muscular head, a mouth full of sharp, serrated teeth, and a powerful jaw that could deliver a fatal bone-crushing bite to the neck of its victims. Like Tyrannosaurus, Albertosaurus had puny forearms that were too short to reach up to its mouth to feed. With only 2 functional fingers on its arms, as opposed to 3, grasping for food would also have been very difficult. Some believe that Albertosaurus used these tiny limbs to hold on to females during mating. Others think they were used to help the dinosaur raise itself up when it was lying prone on the ground. Paleontologists still wonder whether Albertosaurus and its flesh-eating relatives were fast-moving predators. Their bodies were too heavy to chase prey at high speeds for very long distances. More likely, Albertosaurus waited for its victims, then charged them at speeds of 18 or 20 miles an hour. Once close enough, Albertosaurus could clamp its powerful jaws down on the neck of its victim and then deliver a stunning blow with its powerful clawed legs. Dinosuchus, big as a dinosaur. The first primitive crocodile appeared on the Earth 230 million years ago, during the mid-Triassic period, about the same time the first dinosaur appeared. Interestingly, both dinosaurs and crocodiles are from the same group of reptiles known as archosaurs, or ruling reptiles. But somehow crocodiles survived, while dinosaurs did not. Originally, many crocodiles probably spent their time on land, hunting for insects or small animals. Over time, however, they became the semi-aquatic animal we know today. One ancient crocodile named Dinosuchus, however, was quite unique. Only the skull of Dinosuchus has been found, and it measured an unbelievable 6 feet 6 inches long. If Dinosuchus was built the same way modern crocodiles are built, then its body would have been 50 feet long. With its massive jaw, Dinosuchus would have been one of the most ferocious meat-eaters alive at the time. Lying hidden in the swamps, Dinosuchus could have seized even medium-sized dinosaurs with a single snap of its enormous jaws. Sauropods versus predators. If you get the feeling that this giant Brachiosaurus is not going to get the worst of its fight against the meat-eating Ceratosaur, you are probably right. The largest of the plant-eating dinosaurs probably had little to fear from meat-eaters. Some scientists believe these giants could even rise up on their rear feet and come down hard on a pesky predator. It was also quite likely that a Brachiosaurus could use its immense tail like a whip, knocking down large meat-eaters with a single blow. Triceratops, rhinoceros of dinosaurs. With its mighty three-horned head and heavily armored body, a fast-charging Triceratops must have been a fearsome sight to any hungry Tyrannosaurus. Certainly not what you would call an easy meal. Triceratops was among the best known of the horned-faced dinosaurs called ceratopods. It was also one of the last dinosaurs to exist on the planet, before dinosaurs mysteriously became extinct. Scientists know this because Triceratops's bones have been found in the most recent sediments containing dinosaur fossils. Normally a peaceful plant eater, Triceratops offered the perfect defense against marauding predators like Tyrannosaurus. Massively built, an adult Triceratops could grow to more than 30 feet long and weigh up to 11 tons, heavier than an elephant. Its skull was built like an enormous shield with a thick neck frill, a short, thick nose horn, and two long brow horns, which sometimes measured over 3 feet long. Triceratops lived some 70 to 65 million years ago, and likely roamed in great herds throughout western North America. In 1900, dinosaur collector John Bell Hatcher recovered 32 ceratopian skulls in the area around Niobrara County, Wyoming, and almost all of them belonged to the Triceratops family. Lambeosaurus, crazy crest. Lambeosaurus was a member of the hadrosaur family, the most common of dinosaur families. This duck-billed dinosaur had a tall, hollow, squarish crest on top of its head, and behind that a horn that pointed backward. It had hoof-like feet and walked on all fours. One lambeosaur found in Baja California, Mexico, appears to be about 54 feet long, making it the largest hadrosaur known. At one time, scientists thought the strange headgear of Lambeosaur and its relatives was a snorkel, and that the dinosaurs lived in the water. Now they believe these animals live just on land. The strange name means lamb's reptile, in honor of discoverer Lawrence Lamb, who found the first one in 1914. Quetzalcoatlus, the largest flying reptile. Until recently, the giant winged pteranodon was thought to have been the largest of the flying reptiles known as pterosaurs. But in 1972, the remains of an even more enormous pterosaur was discovered in Big Bend National Park in Texas. Quetzalcoatlus, or feathered serpent, named after an Aztec god, would have been the largest and heaviest flying reptile by far. The fossilized remains indicate that this giant pterosaur would have weighed nearly 190 pounds and had a wingspan of close to 50 feet, almost the same size as a small airplane. Quetzalcoatlus probably lived far inland, away from water. Like other pterosaurs, Quetzalcoatlus's wings were made of skin, stretched along the lengths of greatly elongated fourth fingers of each claw. Its neck was probably longer than the earlier Rhamphorhynchus, and its head was probably more elongated. Scientists think Quetzalcoatlus had excellent vision and behaved like a modern vulture, spotting its prey from afar, then attacking or feeding on the carcasses of decaying dinosaurs. Tyrannosaurus, the tyrant. One of the most ferocious of the dinosaurs was the terrible 7-ton meat-eating Tyrannosaurus, which literally means king of the tyrant lizards. Tyrannosaurus was probably the largest land predator ever. It stood almost 20 feet tall on its rear legs, had a massive tail, puny front legs, powerful jaws, and sharp 7-inch long saw-edged teeth for tearing its prey, such as plant-eating hadrosaurs. From nose to tail, Tyrannosaurus measured up to 45 feet in length. Its skull alone was nearly 4 feet long. These monstrous predators lived toward the very end of the age of dinosaurs, and likely preyed on packs of duck-billed hadrosaurs, as well as herds of the better-defended Triceratops. According to fossil evidence, Tyrannosaurus ranged across great parts of North America and much of Asia. Some paleontologists believe Tyrannosaurus was a scavenger, but most believe it was a terrible hunter, swift on its back feet and ferocious in battle. Ceratopods, armed and peaceful. Ceratopods were heavy, four-footed animals with large, heavily armored heads, often with horns. The armor around their heads usually extended to cover their necks as well, and was so thick that only the hardest blow could have any effect on these enormous dinosaurs. The ceratopids lived for about 20 million years at the end of the Cretaceous period, probably roaming in herds and eating even the toughest vegetation with their powerful beak-like jaws. Physically, they are remarkably similar to today's rhinoceros, and many scientists believe that they moved and behaved like them as well. When threatened, a herd of ceratopids may have faced outwards to present a meat-eating dinosaur with a wall of dangerous spikes. Tyrannosaurus, fast or slow? If you were to stand next to Tyrannosaurus, assuming he didn't eat you first, you would barely come up to his knee. Tyrannosaurus was the largest of the meat-eating dinosaurs, with a massive skull and teeth as long as 7 inches. Some scientists think the 45-foot-long, 7-ton monster you see in this movie was so big he could only waddle along slowly. Reasoning from this, they believe he may have been a scavenger who chased other hunter dinosaurs away from their lunch and ate it himself. Or perhaps he relied upon a surprise attack to bring down his prey. However, other scientists who have examined the legs of Tyrannosaurus believe he was fast, capable of running along at up to 40 miles an hour. Tyrannosaurids, big meat eaters. The largest of the meat-eating dinosaurs were the tyrannosaurids, or tyrant reptiles. Not only were they the largest meat-eaters, but they were also the largest of the two-legged or theropod dinosaurs. These were sturdy animals with a short, thick neck and slim tail. They had a vicious set of saw-edged teeth, and in some cases a mouth large enough to swallow a human being. There being no humans around at the time, however, they probably ate the duck-billed dinosaurs that roamed North America. How to make a fossil. Everything we know about dinosaurs comes from studying the fossils they left behind. Not every animal or plant that died in the distant past created a fossil. Usually, whatever was left of a dead animal was eaten by scavengers or gradually dissolved into the earth by the forces of air and water. Occasionally, however, the conditions were just right to transform certain parts of an animal's body into a fossil that could be preserved for hundreds of millions of years. The most frequent way for that to happen was if an animal's body ended up in a place where it would be quickly covered with layers of sediment or sand, therefore protecting it from decay. The most likely place for this to happen was on the sandy bottom of the sea, or a lake or river. Many times, dinosaurs that died by rivers or lakes were washed away by the water to a sandbar, or sank to the water's bottom where their bodies were covered with soft sediment. It is also possible for dinosaurs to be fossilized in deserts, where the fast-blowing sand could quickly cover up a body. In either case, the soft parts of the dinosaur, like the skin, muscles, and organs, eventually dissolved, leaving the harder parts, like the skeleton and teeth, preserved. Over the years, as more and more sediment covered the dinosaur's remains, minerals replaced the material of the bones or teeth, and left a hardened duplicate of the original bone. Usually, the hardest parts of an animal were the only parts fossilized, but sometimes the soft tissue, such as the skin or muscle, could be preserved in its original state, and at times, trace fossils, such as footprints in soft soil, were preserved. Rhabdodon, Transylvanian herbivore. Rhabdodon priscus was a bird-hipped, plant-eating dinosaur that grew to about 13 feet long. It may have been a member of either the Hypsilophodont or Iguanodontid families. It lived in Transylvania, part of Romania, during the late Cretaceous period. Rhabdodon was an ornithopod, a group of small bipedal herbivores, which include Lysophosaurus, Hypsilophodon, and Dryosaurus. Tyrannosaurus, not always the winner. Tyrannosaurus rex means king of the tyrant lizards. But being king didn't always mean winning a fight. In this movie battle scene, we can see that a healthy Triceratops, with its sharp horns and armor-plated head and neck, might well battle a hungry Tyrannosaurus to a standstill. Meteor versus dinosaurs. Could the impact of a giant meteor striking the Earth have caused the sudden extinction of the dinosaurs? Some scientists think so. Meteorites, which are pieces of rocks from space, have always collided with the Earth. Enormous craters, like the one in this picture, are proof that very large meteors have indeed struck the Earth in the distant past. It's very possible, think some, that a massive meteor measuring 6 to 9 miles wide may have hit the planet sometime at the end of the Cretaceous period. The force of the impact from such a meteor would have created a crater nearly 100 miles wide. It also would have made an enormous explosion, sending huge amounts of dust and debris into the atmosphere. In a very short time, the skies around the world would have been covered by a blanket of dust, blotting out much of the sun's rays. This could have lasted for several months or even years. Without much sunlight, the temperature around the Earth would have quickly dropped below freezing, killing plants as well as animals. If enough plants were killed, then the food for many dinosaurs would have disappeared. The crater left by such a meteor must be huge. If so, where is it? There's a giant crater on the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico that seems about the right size. Though most visible traces of it are gone, it has been measured at 110 to 185 miles in diameter, which means the meteor that struck there must have been 5 to 10 miles across. Death ray for dinosaurs? One long-standing explanation for why dinosaurs died so mysteriously is that a star in a nearby constellation exploded and bathed the Earth in deadly cosmic rays. If the star's explosion was close enough, then many animals, both large and small, would have been killed. But there is one major problem with this theory. Why is it that some animals, such as birds, mammals, and crocodiles, survived, while others, like dinosaurs and marine reptiles, did not? What killed the dinosaurs? Why did the dinosaurs die? One theory is that a giant meteor or swarm of comets hit the Earth and killed them all. Nobel Prize-winning scientist Luis Alvarez, a leading supporter of that theory, noted that throughout the world, a metal called iridium suddenly appeared in the layer of rocks that were formed about the time dinosaurs died. Iridium is rare on Earth, but fairly common in space. Maybe something from space hit Earth. If so, it would have had to be at least 6 miles in diameter, about the size of Mount Everest. If such a meteor hit Earth at 90,000 miles an hour, the sky would have been filled with dust, and the sun would have been very dim. Without enough sunlight, plants would die, and then the animals would starve to death. Perhaps all life didn't die, because some seeds remained in the ground waiting for the sun to return. Possibly some animals lived by eating the carcasses of other creatures. The crater left by such a meteor must be huge. If so, where is it? There's a giant crater on the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico that seems about the right size. Though most visible traces of it are gone, it has been measured at 110 to 185 miles in diameter, which means the meteor that struck there must have been 5 to 10 miles across. What is a dinosaur? There were many reptiles that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs, including some that are alive today, such as crocodiles and turtles. There were also reptiles that vanished with the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous period. The flying reptiles, pterosaurs, and marine reptiles like Ichthyosaurus, Mosasaurus, and Plesiosaurus. So what distinguishes dinosaurs from these other reptiles? Dinosaurs were land-dwelling reptiles. They probably arose from a group of archosaurs called thesodonts in the middle to late Triassic period. Many scientists believe archosaurs evolved a number of improvements to crocodilian leg and muscle arrangement, enabling them to move much faster and hunt more effectively. With dinosaurs, the process continued, and the main feature that marks the dinosaurs appeared: an upright stance on straight legs. Other reptiles, such as lizards, have legs that spread to the sides of their bodies and knee joints that are at an angle. Dinosaurs, with their legs beneath their bodies, grew quite large because their distinctive legs could hold them up. In fact, scientists can recognize a dinosaur fossil just by observing the arrangement of the hip joint, the angle of the knee and ankle joints, and the ridges and knobs on the bones that mark the places where the muscles attach. Even for those who are not paleontologists, it is fairly easy to recognize a dinosaur. All dinosaurs lived on land and walked upright on column-like legs. They laid eggs with shells and lived only during the Mesozoic era, which is broken into three periods: the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. All dinosaurs belong to the class Reptilia and the superorder Archosauria. Below Archosauria are two principal groups, the orders Saurischia and Ornithischia, which differ in their hip arrangement. Some scientists have argued that dinosaurs, which may have been warm-blooded, are so different from other members of the class Reptilia that they deserve their own class, Dinosauria. If birds, now in a class to themselves, aves, did descend from dinosaurs, then they should also be classified as Dinosauria, and that would make them the only members of that group to survive the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period. The slow death theory. One of the simplest theories of why the dinosaurs died out is that the Earth's climate gradually changed. As the continents of the Earth continued to shift 60 million years ago, new mountains rose and sea levels gradually dropped. As a result, the average air temperature around the Earth could have fallen 17 degrees or more, changing weather patterns and giving rise to new kinds of plants. It's possible, think some scientists, that dinosaurs were not well adapted to such colder weather. If they were indeed cold-blooded animals, then the colder air temperature would have made them more sluggish and less able to hunt or forage for food. Another possibility is that dinosaurs were not well suited to the new vegetation, such as flowering plants and leafy trees, which thrived in a cooler climate. Convincing as this theory sounds, it does not explain why dinosaurs did not simply move to the tropical regions of the world, where the temperature is far warmer, or why dinosaur fossils have been found above what was then the Arctic Circle. Earth as we know it. Just as the dinosaurs began to vanish from the Earth, the modern continents had finally begun to take shape. Australia and Antarctica had broken off of South America. India had moved north until it pressed into Asia, forming the Himalayan mountain range. North America, South America, and Europe had begun to take up their positions on either side of the globe. With the continents separated now, the plant and animal life began to develop very differently from place to place. Was Earth made in 4004 BC? Though lots of dinosaur bones have been found, and scientists estimate the universe is billions of years old, not everybody believes it. Some religious people prefer to believe the estimate of 16th century Anglican Archbishop James Ussher, who thought the Earth began about 6,000 years ago. One explanation of how Earth could be so young when there is such evidence of its age is that God created a mature universe. In such a case, stars would shine on the night they were created, though light years away. Trees would have yearly rings, though they were minutes old. There would be decomposed organic matter in the soil, though no plants had ever grown before, and so forth. This is a philosophical explanation, not a scientific one, since it suggests the evidence does not point where it seems to point. However, many religious scholars accept scientists' estimates of the age of the universe. In fact, they feel the discovery that the universe had a beginning is evidence that someone, God, must have started it. Also, the discovery that the constants of physics at the basis of the universe seem precisely adjusted for life seems to many to argue for a great designer. For example, if gravity was a bit stronger, stars would burn out too quickly for planets suitable for life to develop. If it was a bit weaker, they wouldn't create the heavy elements necessary for life. A recent explanation of how the biblical story of creation and science mesh belongs to astronomer and former Caltech fellow Dr. Hugh Ross. He updates an earlier explanation that creation days were actually long ages. In outline, this is his explanation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Earth's early atmosphere blocked the sunlight. Day 1, let there be light. As the atmosphere changed, the sun's light began to shine through. Day 2, God separates the waters above from the waters below. The evaporation and rain cycle began. Day 3, dry land appears, then plants appear. Land rose from the ocean, then plants appeared. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars appear. The changing atmosphere finally reveals the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, sea creatures, up to and including sea mammals, then birds appear. Day 6, animals, Ross says these are land mammals, then humans appear. Father of paleontology. Georges Cuvier knew more about old bones than anybody of his time. In fact, he is called the father of paleontology. But when he saw a giant tooth sent to him by Gideon Mantell, he thought it belonged to an extinct rhinoceros. Later, he admitted his error and correctly predicted that the iguanodon tooth meant scientists would soon discover a whole new group of animals. On the other hand, Cuvier correctly identified a huge jawbone brought out of a chalk mine in Holland as belonging to a giant marine reptile called Mosasaurus. Cuvier believed there had been repeated extinctions of life forms throughout history, a view that was later rejected, but today has been largely accepted again. He was also convinced that evolution had not occurred. He said each species is so well developed that it would not be able to survive any serious changes. Gideon Mantell finds fossil teeth. For thousands of years, dinosaur fossils turned up without anyone knowing exactly what they were. In the Middle Ages, some people even thought that dinosaur fossils were actually the bones of ancient dragons or giants. That all changed in 1822, when a quiet English doctor named Gideon Mantell became the first person to prove that a dinosaur fossil was actually from a race of prehistoric animals. It began one day when Mantell and his wife Mary were calling on patients and happened to spot a pair of enormous fossilized teeth lying in a pile of gravel alongside the road. At first, Mantell couldn't figure out what animal, living or dead, could possibly have had teeth that large. So he traced the gravel to several nearby stone quarries and soon discovered more fossil fragments from the same animal. When Mantell took the fossils to scientists, no one believed the teeth were from an ancient animal. But by looking closely at the kind of rock from which the fossils had come, Mantell could prove they were indeed very old. He also noticed that the fossils strongly resembled a modern-day lizard known as the iguana. With this information, Mantell wrote a paper claiming that the teeth were from an enormous 40-foot lizard, which he named Iguanodon. Buckland names Megalosaurus. The first dinosaur to be given a scientific name was Megalosaurus, whose bones were found by clergyman and Oxford University scientist William Buckland. The dinosaur was identified in 1824 from a jawbone with teeth, a portion of the hip, shoulder bones, and some bones from the hind leg that Buckland decided belonged to a big meat-eating reptile. Owen. This is no lizard. By 1841, several major dinosaur fossil discoveries had been made around England. Yet most of the scientists who studied them believed they were nothing more than members of a group of giant lizards. That is until Sir Richard Owen took a closer look at the evidence. Owen was a famous British anatomist who studied the physical relationships between different groups of animals. When Owen studied the three most important fossil discoveries at the time, he quickly concluded that the bones were not at all like the bones of any lizard alive at the time. In fact, they were so different that he believed the fossils must have come from an entirely different group of animal, which had long since vanished from the earth. He called this new group of animal Dinosauria, which meant terrible reptile or fearfully great reptile. Owen described these creatures as being giant elephant-like reptiles which lumbered clumsily on all fours. Eventually, Owen published his findings in a book, which created an enormous stir in England, where people were fascinated to discover that a race of huge animals inhabited the earth long before there were people. First Dinosaur Park. After the great exhibition of the works of industry of all nations, held at Hyde Park, London, in 1851, a large steel, glass, and wood building called the Crystal Palace was moved to Sydenham Park, now Crystal Palace Park, in southeast London. Dinosaur scholar Richard Owen was asked to provide life-sized models of dinosaurs for the grounds of the park. Together with sculptor Waterhouse Hawkins, they made several dinosaurs. Just before they finished, in 1854, they held a party for 20 guests inside the nearly complete body of an iguanodon model. The Crystal Palace burned down, but Owen's models, though now known to be incorrect, are still there. Charles Darwin's Revolution. Charles Darwin was a little unsure. Was he ready to publish his findings? 22 years earlier, in 1836, he had returned to England with the germ of a radical new idea about the origin of life. On the Galapagos Islands, near South America, Darwin had seen animals that were related, but different. Perhaps he thought the mechanism that caused these slight variations could also cause major changes in plant and animal life. He theorized that in the battle to live, plants and animals most adapted to their environment would survive and pass on the survival traits to their offspring. Eons of little adaptations, he thought, could result in completely different species. His evidence clearly showed that small evolutionary changes do occur, but his evidence for big changes was more speculative. But on the other hand, Darwin knew other biologists were working on the same idea. So he finally sat down and wrote The Origin of Species. It came out in 1859 and caused a furor, since most people believed God created the plants and animals. Critics challenged him on the infinitude of connecting links he had predicted must exist. Where are these links, they asked. The uproar died down as most scientists and others accepted Darwin's theory. Monkeys and typewriters. Darwin's theory of evolution has a simplicity that is appealing. One of his contemporaries summarized it in a single phrase. Evolution, he said, is the survival of the fittest. The theory is widely accepted by scientists today. However, some people object to evolution on religious grounds and some on scientific grounds. Though it is the minority view in scientific circles, critics of evolution raise some interesting points. Here are a few. It is difficult, some believe to the point of impossibility, for life to arise from non-life, even if all necessary ingredients were mixed in abundance. Though some doubt he meant it, Darwin apparently did not believe life developed from non-life. He attributed the first living thing to a creator. Nevertheless, life developing from non-life has become part of evolutionary theory. English scientist Thomas Huxley suggested time and chance caused the first life. He reportedly said 6 monkeys typing mindlessly for millions of years could write all the books in the British Museum. By the same random method, he said, simple life could be created. But in his recent book, The Philosophical Scientists, British scientist David Foster says this is unlikely. Allowing Huxley all the monkeys there have ever been, typing for all the time there has ever been, there would be a shortfall ratio of more than 100 million millions, and that only relates to the chance of typing one line of one book in the British Museum. That evolution causes minor changes is virtually beyond dispute. But some scientists, including Darwin's contemporary, French anatomist Georges Cuvier, don't believe it can cause major changes. This is because living beings are complex mechanisms, and a change to one part of the mechanism affects other parts. Compare life to an automobile. You can change the paint or flare the fenders somewhat without problem. But for example, if you change the size of a piston even a bit, other parts of the engine must be changed to accommodate it. That such coordinated changes should take place by chance, at the same time, in the same living being, strikes some as extremely unlikely. Darwin said, occasional small changes make some animals better able to survive. Conversely, detrimental changes make them less likely to survive. But some anatomical changes would appear detrimental unless in fully functioning form. Consider the bat, whose wing bones are essentially its fingers. If bats evolved from non-flying creatures, wouldn't the increasing length of these animals' fingers make them very clumsy and likely to be somebody's lunch long before the fingers became wings? The fossil record doesn't show gradual changes. Darwin said big biological changes result from eons of little changes. Some in his day, such as anatomist Sir Richard Owen, who coined the word dinosaur, said the fossils didn't show little changes adding up to big changes. Many believed more study would close these gaps, but it hasn't. Some scientists have proposed a theory called punctuated evolution, in which species remain stable for ages, then isolated groups rapidly change from environmental pressure. Rapid change means there would be few intermediate species, which would explain the gaps in the fossil record. However, it also requires squeezing a vast number of changes into a relatively short time, which strikes some, including traditional Darwinists, as unlikely. Studies show that life forms that look similar are often genetically similar. Apes and humans, for example. However, critics say genetic material does not show the progression that evolution demands. For example, most scientists believe jawless fish evolved into bony fish, which evolved into amphibians, then to reptiles, and finally to mammals. This means genetic material should become increasingly different as you move from jawless fish to mammals. But it doesn't, they say. In fact, the genetic material of bony fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals is about equally different from jawless fish and from each other. For animals that evolved away from each other rapidly at some point in the very distant past, however, current genetic sequencing techniques may not be sensitive enough to detect these differences. While the critics of evolution hold a minority view, their objections suggest that the question is not fully resolved. Marsh and Cope, the Fossil War. In the 1870s, the intense rivalry between two Americans, O.C. Marsh, a professor at Yale, and E.D. Cope, a brilliant scientist from Philadelphia, led to some of the greatest dinosaur discoveries of all time. The rivalry began in 1866, when Cope showed Marsh his study of an ancient skeleton found in Kansas. Upon closer inspection, Marsh discovered a big mistake in Cope's drawing. The head of the plesiosaur, an aquatic reptile, was placed on the wrong end of the skeleton. After Marsh published his findings, Cope was so upset that he tried to destroy every copy of the report before anyone could read it. 10 years later, when fragments from a rich fossil deposit in Colorado were brought separately to each of the two men, they immediately headed out west, determined to be the first to unearth the most spectacular dinosaur fossils. This period became known as the Great Dinosaur Rush and led to some of the largest dinosaur discoveries in the world. With money from their wealthy families, Marsh and Cope sent huge teams of explorers to Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana on long, arduous fossil digs. Between 1877 and the late 1890s, the two men discovered nearly 130 new species of dinosaurs, including the well-known Brachiosaurus, Triceratops, and Tyrannosaurus. Today, some of the largest, most breathtaking dinosaur displays in the world are the result of this intense rivalry. The president protects fossils. When a young scientist named Earl Douglas spotted a massive Diplodocus thigh bone resting on a sandstone ledge near Vernal, Utah, he had no idea he was on the verge of one of the richest fossil finds in history. Douglas, who worked for the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, returned to the site a year later, hoping to uncover the rest of what turned out to be a 70-foot-long Diplodocus skeleton. As Douglas and others began to excavate, They soon discovered thousands of dinosaur bones, lodged in the stone around the skeleton. For the next 13 years, the Carnegie Museum sent one excavation team after another to the stone quarry, unearthing the first complete skeletons of giant plant eaters, such as Apatosaurus, Diplodocus, and Camarasaurus. They also found the bones of Stegosaurus and the meat-eating Allosaurus that must have preyed on the slower-moving plant eaters millions of years ago. Later, however, when amateur fossil hunters began combing the land around the quarry in search of more bones, President Woodrow Wilson turned the site into a national park to protect the fossils from any damage. Today, visitors can go to Dinosaur National Monument, as it is now called, and see a long wall of stone filled with dinosaur bones, still in their original resting place. Tanzania, finding the big one. Buried deep beneath the ancient rock of southern Africa are the fossils of numerous varieties of dinosaur. Between 1909 and 1912, two German paleontologists, Werner Janisch and Edwin Hennig, hired hundreds of untrained African natives to dig through the bone pits of what is now Tanzania. For 3 years, the workers labored in the sweltering heat, unearthing thousands of bones that they then crated and carried by foot to a distant port town on the east coast of Africa. Among these bones, some of which weighed hundreds of pounds or more, the fossil hunters discovered the nearly complete skeleton of the giant dinosaur Brachiosaurus. When it was reconstructed at the East Berlin Natural History Museum in Germany, the skeleton stood 40 feet tall, as high as a 3-story building, and the tallest complete dinosaur skeleton in the world. Many other types of dinosaurs were found at the same site, including relatives of the spiny-plated Stegosaurus and giant plant eaters of North America. Removing fossils. Easy does it. Finding a fossil is one thing. Removing it from the ground without damaging it is quite another. When most dinosaur fossil sites are discovered, only a fragment of the fossil is visible. The rest is usually embedded in hard earth or rock. Using very special tools and techniques, experienced fossil collectors can take weeks just to excavate the fossils out of a small patch of ground. First, the area where the fossil has been discovered must be labeled, photographed, and drawn so that records will be available for researchers to use in the future. Most of the time, the fossil bones are cracked or crumbly and need to be painted with shellac or glue to harden the fossil surface. Then they are usually covered with moistened paper until the fossils look like they are made of paper mache. The next step is to cover the wet newspaper with burlap soaked in plaster. In most cases, paleontologists dig a trench around the fossil and wrap the jacket of newspaper and burlap almost completely around the fossil. At this stage, the paleontologists can break the fossil free from the site with little or no harm done to it. If a fossil is small enough, excavators can scrape away the earth around the fragment and then carry it away. Much larger fossils, such as the skull of a Triceratops or the thigh bone of an Apatosaurus, can require that huge pieces of rock surrounding the fossil be removed using power hammers and sometimes even explosives. When a large enough block has been carved out, the fossil can be carried away by tractor or truck. Andrews' Dinosaur Treasure Trove. Roy Chapman Andrews went to Mongolia in 1922, hoping to find out something about the origin of man. He didn't find out anything about man, but he discovered a treasure trove of dinosaur bones. During 4 expeditions to the Gobi Desert between 1922 and 1925, he discovered Protoceratops, a nest of Protoceratops eggs, Pinacosaurus, Saurornithoides, Oviraptor, and Velociraptor, none of which were known before. Treasure of the Orient. By the 1920s, scientists around the world were caught up in a frenzy to find clues to the origins of man. So in 1922, the American Museum of Natural History sent a huge expedition to Mongolia in the hopes of unearthing fossils of primitive man and prehistoric mammals. What they discovered instead was a vast and varied collection of dinosaur fossils, some of which had never been seen before. The fossils were located in a sandy basin in the forbidding Gobi Desert, where temperatures can range between 100 degrees in the summer and negative 100 degrees in the winter. Between 1922 and the present, numerous expeditions have been to the Gobi, uncovering entirely new species of dinosaurs, including Oviraptor, Stegosaurus, Protoceratops, and Velociraptor. In some of these cases, the fossils were found resting on the surface, covered only by a layer of fine dust. One of the most fascinating fossil finds from the Gobi Desert excavations was a group of nearly perfectly preserved fossil eggs of Protoceratops, a small horned dinosaur related to Triceratops. The eggs were found arranged in a small depression in the ground that must have served as a nest. They were oval-shaped and not much larger than a human hand. In the same area, scientists eventually discovered Protoceratops fossils of all ages, from tiny hatchlings to full-sized adults. Nests in the sand. Scientists first discovered dinosaur eggs during an expedition to Mongolia, where they found more than 50 fossil dinosaur eggs covered with sand in the Gobi Desert. In this movie, you can see a recreation of a Hadrosaurus hatching. The Little Plan of Life. From dinosaurs to you, there is an amazing little set of plans for every living thing. It's a chemical called DNA. DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, comes in long strands that inhabit the nucleus of every living cell. Human DNA, for example, is made up of about 3 billion steps. Although DNA is often called the blueprint for life, because it is like plans from which a building is made, it's more like a very complicated computer program. Computer programs consist of line after line of simple statements. Move X to Y, subtract T from Z, jump to line 17. DNA is just like this. Each stair step is a line in the code. DNA is such an amazingly compact information storage system that all the designs for every living thing that has ever existed on Earth, plus all the information in every book ever published, would fit in a teaspoon. In some cases, the same string of DNA can even contain different information. It is as if a sentence reads differently depending on which letter you begin on. English physicist Francis Harry Compton Crick and American biochemist James Dewey Watson won the Nobel Prize for discovering the basic structure of DNA. Quetzalcoatlus, the robot flies. On a windy day 100 million years after becoming extinct, the largest known pterosaur flew again. Using the latest aircraft technology, Paul MacCready, known for his human-powered flying machines, created a mechanical Quetzalcoatlus. Instead of flesh and bones, this pterosaur was filled with electromechanical and electronic devices to control its flight. The new Quetzalcoatlus was patterned after fossilized bones of the earlier version. Though controlled from the ground, much in the manner of a model airplane, the robot also had sophisticated internal electronics to steady it while in flight. Scientists believe the original Quetzalcoatlus was probably a gliding creature that had excellent vision, preying on smaller animals or eating the carcasses of decaying dinosaurs. Dinosaurs, from lab to museum. Once a dinosaur has been removed from the ground, much work remains to be done. In the laboratory, the bones are unpacked from their protective coverings and cleaned. Scientists use microscopes and brushes and tiny tools, such as dental picks, to completely remove the soil surrounding the bones. They also make pictures of each of the pieces. The bone fragments are strengthened with liquid plastics and glued together. A favorite hardener is the acetone-based lacquer called Glyptol, which penetrates the fossil and then hardens. Elmer's glue is the glue of choice. It can be easily softened with water and pulled apart for readjustment. The process of recreating a dinosaur skeleton can take years. After scientists discover what the dinosaurs looked like, they can make molded copies of the bones to display in museums. These reproductions are often arranged in a realistic fashion to show museum visitors what the dinosaurs looked like, how they acted, and what their environment was like. Looking for dinosaurs. Most of the dinosaur fossils that exist in the world today are buried beneath hundreds of feet of earth that has built up over millions and millions of years. That makes finding dinosaur fossils no easy task. So how do the scientists who study dinosaurs, generally known as paleontologists, find their fossils? Very often purely by accident. The ground or rock around a fossil may have eroded enough to expose a part of the fossil. Sometimes people, like miners, will stumble upon a collection of fossil remains while they are digging through layers of rock. More often than not, paleontologists find dinosaur fossils by playing detective. The first place they look is where the rock is as old as a dinosaur would be. That means between 65 and 210 million years. Then, since most fossils were created when layers of sediment from a river or lake covered a dinosaur's body, they look in places where there is sedimentary rock. Usually, the sides of river canyons are the best places to start because the layers of rock are well exposed. Other good places can be where scientists suspect rivers or large bodies of water may have existed hundreds of millions of years ago. Tyrannosaurus. Taking a stroll. Using the latest computer-aided design techniques, artist Cyrus Lum created a wire-frame Tyrannosaurus. Applied an appropriate skin, chrome looked great, but maybe not. Then animated his creation, which you can see in action here. We snapped pictures of the walking Tyrannosaurus and compiled them as a film, compressing the images using a special algorithm. Tyrannosaurus is one of the favorite and best known, not to mention frightening, of the dinosaurs. Its name means king of the tyrant lizards, and it was probably the largest land predator ever. It had a 4-foot-long head and stood almost 20 feet tall on its rear legs. Museums. To learn more about dinosaurs, check the lists of dinosaur museums below.